Hello there, and welcome to the planet's memory, a place where the clock slows, the mind softens, and even science remembers how to whisper. Tonight, we begin a quiet journey through time, not the kind measured in calendars or centuries, but something deeper, more ancient, something that asks, what if Earth's entire history played out in a single day? What would midnight sound like? What would it feel like to stand at the very beginning, when the planet first stirred in the darkness, before names, before memory, before anything had yet become what it would be? Tonight, we begin at the very first moment of that imagined day, when the Earth was born and time itself took its first breath. Before we begin, I'd love to know, where are you listening from tonight? Are you wrapped in blankets somewhere quiet? Somewhere where the night feels slow and forgiving? Or maybe you're on a long, still walk, letting each footstep carry your thoughts a little further than before. Wherever you are, I'm glad you're here. And if this kind of slow, thoughtful journey brings you peace, I hope you'll comment, or share. It helps this soft corner of the internet reach others who may be needing gentler stories, too. Now, close your eyes if you can. Let the weight of the day fall away, and drift with me back to the first second of midnight. It begins in silence. Not the kind we know, not the hush between two words or the pause before rain, but a silence so total, it doesn't even know it's silence yet. Because there is no one to hear it. There is no light, no air, no breath, only a scattered dust cloud, adrift in the nothingness. Particles spin, drawn together by gravity's invisible will, clumping, circling, collapsing. Not quickly, never quickly, but over millions of years. We would never see it happen with our eyes. But if we could compress those eons into seconds, the transformation would look like magic. A star is born first, and around that star something begins to take shape. A sphere, uneven, violent, molten. A world becoming Earth. Midnight on the planetary clock. The birth of stone. But this is not a peaceful birth. This is chaos. The surface is a boiling skin of magma, constantly reshaping itself, cracking open and spilling rivers of fire. Meteorites fall like rain, carving new scars into the glowing crust. The moon, still forming from the same ancient debris, looms impossibly close, bright, unfinished, and dragging tides of molten rock across the surface like a restless tide. No oceans, no oxygen, no sky as we know it, only vapor and heat and heavy, churning clouds that never clear. And yet, something stirs within this instability, something enduring. The first minerals begin to crystallize. The earliest versions of what will one day become continents are pushed and pulled by invisible forces below, tectonic plates in their infancy. We are watching the ground write its first lines. And in these first few moments, in this young, wild midnight, something else begins to happen. The planet starts to keep memory. Not in words, not in numbers, but in matter. Tiny zircon crystals, formed in these chaotic hours, will outlive continents. They'll be carried across billions of years, through erosion, subduction, uplift, and wind. They'll be buried and dug again, and when we eventually find them, impossibly old, impossibly small, they'll tell us things no other witness could. That water existed far earlier than we thought. That stability, however brief, was already possible. That the Earth has always been keeping its own secrets, quietly, patiently, in the structure of stone. It's strange to think that the ground beneath our feet, the very dust of mountains and shorelines, might be the oldest diary ever written. And stranger still to realize that most of what was once here is already gone. Because entropy is the rhythm of this planet. Things decay, things melt, things vanish. The early crust is mostly recycled, erased by time and heat. Whole chapters of Earth's first stories are missing, blank pages lost in the fire of the beginning. But what if some pages remain? Could there be messages written in the isotope ratios of ancient rocks? Could Earth itself, like a living organism, be trying to remember something, not in language but in layering, in heat, in form? And if we could read those messages, not just with microscopes or chemistry, but with imagination, what might they say? Maybe They'd say that time isn't linear, that history isn't neat, that the world has always been a loop of birth and erasure, memory and forgetting. Maybe they'd say that nothing ever truly disappears. It only changes shape. We often think of beginnings as small, as quiet, as separate. But Earth's beginning was vast and loud, and yet somehow also alone. For billions of years, the planet turned without an eye to see it. Fire bloomed without witness. Continents formed and broke without names, without maps, without meaning. But not without purpose. Not without pattern. Not without poetry. And in that slow unfolding, in that endless dance of rock and heat and void, Earth became something more than stone. It became potential, a canvas, a question. Because if midnight could hold such furious birth, what would morning bring? And so we drift now, softly, toward the next moment, when heat meets water, and the rain begins to fall. But before the rain, there was only fire. A fire so vast, so complete, that it made the surface of Earth feel like a living flame, its breath heavy with steam, its heartbeat buried beneath molten stone. The sky above was not yet sky, but a dense and toxic veil, thick with carbon dioxide and sulfur clouds. It held the heat in, wrapped the world in a fever. And the land, if it could be called land, flowed. Not like rivers, not like water, but like lava blood, pulsing slowly across the skin of the earth. It was in this place, in this heaving, glowing cradle, that the crust began to form. Not because the planet was calm, but because it was tired. Because even chaos has its limits. Over time, long, slow time, the molten oceans of rock began to cool. Surface temperatures dropped by degrees, not quickly, but enough. Enough for hardened sheets of basalt to settle like scabs on an open wound. They cracked, remelted, shifted again, only to harden once more, over and over, until eventually parts of the earth stopped flowing. Here, in these early fractured plains, was the planet's first attempt at stillness. But even stillness here was restless. Beneath this forming crust, the mantle boiled. Heat pushed upward with unimaginable force, cracking the newborn ground open from below. Plumes of magma burst through, spreading fresh liquid fire across the cooling surface. It was violent. It was necessary. You could say this was the beginning of geology, the first slow conversation between heat and rock. A conversation that never ends. Sometimes, if we look closely at the ancient rocks still preserved today, in the cratons of Western Australia or the greenstone belts of Canada, we find whispers of this world. Tiny inclusions, isotope trails, patterns in zircon that tell us, yes, there was land here, once, and it burned. Not myth but memory, not rumor but record. And so we imagine standing there if we could. If somehow we could walk across this alien earth, barefoot on cooling basalt, watching rivers of lava pour into vast basins, hissing where they met ancient gases. Would we call it beautiful, or terrifying, or something else? Something beyond language? Maybe we wouldn't say anything at all. Maybe we would just listen, because this was a planet trying to become itself. Not finished, not fixed, but forming. Every tremble beneath the crust was a kind of punctuation. Every eruption a declaration. I am not done yet. We call this the Hadean era, named after Hades, not for its evil but for its heat. And yet, even in this time of fury, something surprising was beginning to happen. The earliest minerals were already catching traces of something unexpected. Water. Not oceans, not yet, but vapor. Steam rising from beneath. Condensing. Falling. Rising again. Trapped. Boiled. Lifted. Released. The cycle had started, faint, fragmented, but persistent. Could it be that even here, in the heart of fire, the seeds of water were already waiting? Could it be that the two, fire and water, were never enemies, but partners in the same ancient dance? We tend to divide things too cleanly. Land from sea, stone from sky. But on the early Earth, these things were not separate. The crust breathed into the atmosphere. The atmosphere rained into the magma. Everything exchanged. Everything touched. And in this exchange, the Earth began to stabilize, not entirely and not forever, but enough. Enough for patterns to emerge. Enough for islands of solid ground to form. Enough for the possibility of something more to arise. This was not peace. It was preparation. Like the body healing from trauma, the Earth stitched itself together slowly. And in those stitches, a foundation took shape. A crust not just of rock, but of memory. A platform that would one day hold rivers and trees, mountains and creatures. But for now, held only fire and the possibility of future story. We do not know everything about this age. Too much has been subducted, recycled, melted down and remade. The earliest rocks are rare, scattered across a planet that forgot most of its beginnings. But not all. Some crystals, impossibly old, remain. Tiny, durable fragments that speak in isotopic riddles. And when we listen gently, patiently, they tell us the same thing over and over. The Earth remembers even when it burns. And so we leave the cradle now. Gently. The lava flows behind us. The crust, still young, still unstable, begins to cool beneath our feet. Ahead lies a new sound, a new texture, because somewhere in the distance, the rain has started to fall. It began as mist, not a gentle drizzle, not yet, but a thin veil of condensation clinging to the bruised edges of the newborn sky. A sigh from the heavens, tentative and uncertain, falling in flecks upon the searing crust below. The air, once choked with vapor and volcanic breath, had begun to cool just enough, only slightly, to allow the first drops to fall. And they did fall. Over time, they gathered conviction. The mist became droplets. The droplets became streams. And then, without warning, without pause, the sky opened entirely. Rain. Not for days, not for weeks, but for millions of years. The storm that followed was like no storm we know. It had no thunder, no wind, no dramatic sky splits. Just water. Endless water. Cascading from a sky that had never known silence. The kind of rain that softened continents, erased ridgelines, and turned molten plains into glistening basins. Imagine standing there, if we could, watching the world weep itself into oceans. The sound would not be violent, but persistent. A rhythmic hiss, like breath through clenched teeth. Steam would rise in waves as raindrops met the hot rock, evaporating almost instantly, only to rise, cool, and fall again. Over and over, like the memory of falling had embedded itself into the atmosphere. And yet, not all of this water came from Earth. Some of it, perhaps much of it, arrived from beyond, delivered by ancient comets and icy asteroids, flung inward from the outer solar system. Carriers of hydrogen and oxygen, crashing into the planet's surface with violent generosity, bringing not destruction, but a gift. It is strange to think that the oceans may be older than the Earth itself, that the water in your cells, in your tears, in your breath, might once have drifted through interstellar space before it found a home here, before it became part of this billion-year storm. This was the softening of the world. The fire did not vanish. It still boiled beneath the surface, still cracked the crust from below, but now it had a partner. Water crept into the smallest fractures, cooling stone, sculpting it, reshaping it. Rain eroded the sharpness from the rocks. Steam filled the atmosphere. Ponds became lakes. Lakes became inland seas. Seas became oceans. Not suddenly, never suddenly, but inevitably. The Earth was no longer only fire. It was also flow. And through this flow, new forces were born. The first hints of pressure systems. The slow establishment of the hydrologic cycle. The beginning of sediment, that quiet layering of minerals pulled from rock, carried by water, and laid down grain by grain. A language written in mud, telling stories of change. We often think of oceans as blue and calm, or deep and mysterious. But in the beginning they were red, rich in iron, bubbling with chemistry, cloaked in haze. No fish, no coral. No life to speak of, at least not yet. Just liquid potential stretching endlessly over a planet that was learning how to hold. And even now, even billions of years later, the oceans still bear the fingerprint of this origin. The salt in seawater, the minerals in deep trenches, the isotopic signatures trapped in ancient sediments, all of it speaks of that first endless rain. Could it be that the earth didn't simply receive water, but needed it? That without this downpour, without this long baptism, the crust would never have calmed, never have cooled enough to cradle anything soft or living? Could it be that water was always part of the plan, not an afterthought but a requirement? Maybe, maybe not. But what we know is this: water remembers. It holds shape even when it evaporates. It returns to places it has left. It leaves clues in every molecule. And in doing so, it carries memory across time, not perfectly but persistently. Even now, when it rains, something in us stirs. We pause. We listen. And somewhere, quietly, our oldest selves recall that this was how it all began. Rain is not just weather. It is a returning. And for Earth, this return was the first healing. Because as the crust cooled and the oceans gathered, something happened beneath the surface. Something patient, almost invisible. The chemistry of water and rock began to change. Minerals dissolved. Elements mingled. Conditions ripened. And in some silent pool, perhaps warmed by a volcanic vent, perhaps stirred by the tides of a newborn moon, the ingredients for life began to simmer. But that is still ahead. For now we remain here, in the rain, letting it fall across the skin of the earth, letting it whisper its steady song over stone. Because if the rain can remember the stars, what else might it bring with it? What the rain brought, it did not bring loudly. There were no sparks, no thunderclaps of birth. Only warmth, only time, only quiet molecular dances unfolding in the shadows of stone and sea. And in that quiet, something began. Not a creature, not as we know it, not yet, but something simple and ancient and utterly patient. Molecules aligned in the right conditions, drawn together by chemistry's quiet insistence. Chains of carbon curled into loops. Membranes wrapped themselves around reactions. Tiny compartments, the first cells, emerged, not in a rush, but in a long, uncountable sequence of small, lucky steps. This was life, not as breath, not as motion, but as process, as persistence. These first beings had no lungs. They had no eyes, no limbs, no hunger in the way we understand it. They floated, suspended in shallow seas, invisible even to imagination. They consumed what was available, minerals, sunlight, gases, and released what they no longer needed. One of those waste products was oxygen. At first, it didn't matter. The oceans were filled with iron, and the oxygen had work to do. It bound itself to metal, rusting the seas red. It didn't rise, didn't accumulate, didn't change the sky. But the cells kept producing it. Tiny, tireless, indifferent to time. They built and released and built again. Cyanobacteria, blue-green algae, though not algae at all, clustered in mats and sheets across warm coastlines, across tidal pools, across submerged ridges where sunlight could still reach. Layer after layer they grew, exhaled, and grew again. And slowly, the oxygen began to outpace the rust. It started to leak upward. Not in a flood, but in a trickle. Into the oceans, into the atmosphere. At first it was deadly, a poison to many earlier forms. A mass extinction, silent and invisible. But for the Earth it was a transformation. A rewriting of the sky. We call this the Great Oxidation Event, though it wasn't a single moment. It was a billion-year whisper. A slow reshaping of the air itself. The world, once breathless, began to breathe. And yet, even in this pivotal shift, the builders remained unseen. Their presence is recorded in stone, not fossilized as creatures, but as structures. Stromatolites, layered mineral mounds formed by generations of microbial life, still rise in certain ancient shallows, shaped by organisms long gone but still echoing. They are monuments without names, built by communities that never knew they were building anything at all. It's humbling to think that something so small could change something so vast. No tools, no voice, no urgency, just repetition, just presence. What if that's all change really is? Not a sudden act, but a long commitment to being, to staying, to trying again, to leaving traces. We don't often think of the air as something made. We inherit it, assume it. But it was made, built, slowly, carefully, by beings we will never meet, but whom we carry inside us. Because the oxygen we breathe is not just a chemical. It is a legacy, and there is something haunting in that our first ancestors, not by blood, but by essence, had no faces, no words, just function, just quiet creation. And they gave us the morning, a morning without breath at first, but one that slowly filled. And still the earth was far from calm. The crust groaned. Volcanoes roared. Meteorites still fell, though less frequently now. But something had changed. The sky was learning to hold air. And with air, the possibility of lungs. But not yet. The world would have to wait much longer for creatures who could breathe it in. For now, the builders continued, unseen beneath the surface, sculpting the very conditions of life. And if they could speak, perhaps they would ask us the same question we ask of them. Do you know what you're building, just by being here? And yet, if this much can be created by something so small, what else might be quietly changing, even now? Maybe change doesn't always look like movement. Maybe it gathers in silence. Maybe it settles, deep, slow, and unnoticed, until it becomes part of the ground beneath us. Because beneath everything we walk on, beneath every mountain, plain, or shoreline, there are layers we do not see, stories we do not read, rocks that do not speak in words, but hold memory all the same. The earth, it turns out, is a keeper of time, not in clocks or calendars, but in texture, in density, in the weight of minerals shaped under pressure no living thing could survive. The crust beneath our feet is more than stone. It is an archive, a quiet, pressurized library of everything that has come before. Some of these stories lie close to the surface. Others are buried miles below, locked within ancient slabs folded by tectonic force and volcanic breath. Some have been pushed so deep they've melted and reformed. Their original lines blurred by heat, their signatures rewritten but not erased, like a book burned and rebound. And yet, some pages remain unspoiled. If we look close enough, zircon is one of those pages. Tiny crystals, so small most eyes would miss them. And yet, within their lattice structure, zircon holds time like few other things can. It forms in the presence of molten rock, cooling and crystallizing with precision, trapping within it traces of uranium, atoms that decay like a soft, ticking clock. By measuring what remains of that uranium and how much has turned into lead, we can read its age with astonishing accuracy. Some zircons are over 4 billion years old, older than any mountain, older than any fossil, older than the moon's settled orbit. They are Earth's original witnesses. And what do they tell us? That liquid water existed when we thought it couldn't. That continents may have begun to rise while the planet was still an infant. That heat and time, alone, are not enough to erase every memory. These crystals are not beautiful in the traditional sense. They are not cut, not polished, but they are profound, because they remind us that memory is not always delicate. Sometimes it is buried and hard and sharp, and sometimes it is found only through patience and dust. Elsewhere, in layers of black shale and ancient carbonate rock, we find carbon ghosts, chemical fingerprints of living things that no longer exist. Not skeletons, not shells, but the elemental residue of once living matter, pressed into stone, altered by pressure, but not removed, like the outline of a breath that never left. And in the isotopes, in the subtle weight differences between atoms, there are clues about temperature, about atmosphere, about the shifting dance of gases over millions of years. Even without eyes, the rocks have seen. Even without voices, they have remembered. It's humbling, isn't it? To think that a planet can hold memory, that something as cold and still as stone could carry warmth from the past. Not metaphorically, but chemically, structurally, factually. And so we chip at the earth, not to harm it, but to understand it, to read it like a diary written without ink, to listen for what it wants to tell us, about the rain, the fire, the silence, about what came before anything breathed. but there is so much we can't reach. Beneath the crust lies the mantle, vast, moving, unknowable. And deeper still, the core, metal, molten, spinning in darkness. These regions, too, hold stories. But they do not give them freely. They keep their silence. Still, even silence speaks if we let it. A fault line shifts. A volcano exhales. A canyon reveals its layers. The planet offers us glimpses. Not answers, but echoes. And we listen. We measure. We wonder. Could it be that memory isn't just a function of brains, but of place, of substance, of pressure and time? Could it be that we're walking across forgotten sentences every day, written not in language, but in layer? And if so, how much have we already lost? How much is still waiting to be remembered? And if stone can hold memory this long, what else might? What else might remember? Maybe water, maybe the wind, but maybe more than anything, iron. Because iron doesn't just exist, it reacts, keeps no secrets. When oxygen touches it, something happens. A chemical agreement, a soft surrender. The iron gives itself up. And in that quiet act, the world begins to change. At first, it went unnoticed. There were no creatures yet to witness it. No eyes to see the color shifting. But in those early oceans, vast, dark, and rich with dissolved metals, oxygen began to build. Not as a gift, not as an intention, but as a byproduct. A whisper from microbial life. A slow, invisible exhale. An iron always present was waiting. The oxygen met it like a memory finding a surface. And as the two embraced, they transformed. The iron oxidized, rusted, and fell out of the water as solid particles, drifting down into the deep like a rain of red dust. Layer after layer, century after century, this unseen reaction painted the ocean floor. We call them banded iron formations now. Ancient stripes of gray and crimson, laid down when the world was learning how to breathe. Rock made from rust. Time captured through chemistry. There is something almost tender about it. The way a planet rewrote its surface not with violence but with reaction. Not with explosion but with accumulation. This was no sudden revolution. It was slow. So slow we still struggle to measure it. A billion-year oxidation. A transformation not of what the world looked like, but of what it was. Because once the iron had taken all the oxygen it could, once the oceans could rust no more, the excess oxygen had nowhere else to go. So it rose, upward, gently, reluctantly, into the air. And with it, the Earth's atmosphere began to shift. The sky that had once choked with methane and carbon dioxide started to change its character. Not all at once, but enough. Enough to be noticed, not by us, not yet, but by life. By chemistry, by temperature. This was the world's quiet revolution. A shift so profound, so foundational that almost every anaerobic organism, every being that had evolved in a world without oxygen, faced extinction. Oxygen, though vital to us now, was toxic then. It was unfamiliar, corrosive. It broke bonds that life had relied on for billions of years. And yet, it opened a door to complexity, to breath, to energy. Oxygen allowed cells to produce more from less. It made room for the future. But first, it had to wash the world clean. That wash was not gentle. Entire microbial lineages disappeared. Many left no trace. Others left behind subtle clues, shifts in carbon isotopes, small signals in buried sediments. If you know where to look, you can still see the moment oxygen arrived. You can still feel the tension, the betrayal, the opportunity. Could it be that progress is always double-edged? That what gives life to one thing must take life from another? The rusting of the oceans was not only a chemical process, it was a reckoning, a transition, a message written in iron that the world would never be the same again. Even now, rust speaks. On our bridges, our tools, our forgotten rails and buried pipes. It reminds us, quietly, that iron remembers contact, that oxygen never forgets to react, that change is patient but permanent. We walk across continents once buried under those rusted seas. We breathe air shaped by creatures we will never know. We live inside a legacy that was never planned, only made by time, by chance, by slow, ongoing interaction. And the planet still is rusting. Iron in the rocks, iron in the soils, iron in our blood, because we are part of this reaction now, bound to it, inheritors of its possibilities. And sometimes, when we see red cliffs along the edge of a desert, or deep crimson streaks in ancient stone, we are looking at more than color. We are looking at a memory, the memory of a time when the world turned itself inside out, not with thunder, but with oxidation. And if the very air we breathe was once a poison, then what other transformations might be waiting? What else, quietly, is already changing the world beneath our notice? Maybe transformation is not loud. Maybe it does not come like invention or thunder. Maybe it floats, slow, invisible, soft as light, through waters warmed by an ancient sun. Because now we've reached noon, midday on the planetary clock, a place not of endings, not of climax, but of unfolding. A moment of still light stretched wide across the surface of a young world. The skies are clearing, the oceans have settled, and in the shallows, something is happening. Not new, not sudden, but steady. Life is here, not grand, not tall, not complicated, but present, alive, and working. In warm, sunlit pools and gentle tidal flats, cyanobacteria bloom. You wouldn't see them unless you knew where to look. A faint green shimmer just below the surface, a slick across a rock, a murmur of color in the sediment. But there are countless trillions of them, drifting in colonies, weaving sunlight into sugar. Photosynthesis, the quiet revolution. These tiny cells, so ancient they predate breath, are turning photons into fuel, pulling carbon dioxide from the air, releasing oxygen back in. Not to help the planet, not with purpose, but because that's what they do, because that is how they live. And yet, by living, they reshape everything. We tend to look for greatness in size, in complexity, but here the future is microscopic. Every large life form that will ever exist, every tree, every animal, every person, is a descendant of this process. Every breath we take is borrowed from this loop, inherited from these first light harvesters. Cyanobacteria do not know this. They do not need to. They simply divide, grow, drift, build, a kind of living repetition that outlasts mountains. And in that repetition, something extraordinary happens. Time begins to compound. Oxygen increases. Organic matter accumulates. Carbon is buried. The cycles deepen. The planet, once only reacting, now begins to regulate, to balance, to respond. It is not intelligent, not conscious, but it is interactive. The Earth becomes an ecosystem long before we use that word. A system of exchange, of consequence. Could it be that balance doesn't begin with intention, but with persistence? The stromatolites, rocky mounds layered by microbial growth, rise like wrinkles in the shallows. Ancient, slow-growing, textured with time. They are not fossils of creatures, but of activity. Evidence not of what lived, but what kept living. And in the soft protection of these waters, other life experiments begin. New microbes emerge. Some form symbiotic partnerships. Some explore new ways of feeding, moving, adapting. The web of possibility expands not in leaps, but in drifting threads. The sun above, higher now in the sky, pours down energy with patient generosity. It has always done this. But now Earth is learning how to use it. The cells know what to do. They open to the light. They capture it, convert it, store it, share it. Noon is not an event. It is a pause, a fullness, period of saturation. And in this fullness, life does not rush forward. It deepens. It becomes more itself. Sometimes we ask, when did life begin? But maybe the better question is, when did it begin to build a future? Maybe that answer is here, in the drift of microbes through a sunlit sea, in the silent exchange of gases between atmosphere and organism, in the sediment slowly filling with carbon-rich deposits, in the loops that close themselves without direction. Because from this softness, from this steady molecular dance, comes everything. And though no eye yet sees it, though no brain has yet dreamed, the potential is already blooming. Slowly, in cells, in sugars, in suns. The earth at noon is not finished, but it is awake. And if light alone can feed the world, what else might it awaken? What it awakens may not rise. It may not shout or bloom or stretch toward the sky. Some awakenings move downward, quietly, gently, through water into dust. Because even in light things fall. Every moment particles drift. Dead cells, broken shells, fragments of plankton, grains of weathered stone. They all descend, one by one, through the stillness. Carried by gravity's patient pull, they settle onto the sea floor, where sunlight cannot reach. And they stay. This is how the earth keeps time. Not with clocks, not with ticking, but with layers. Layer after layer after layer. A soft, uninterrupted rain of memory. Over days, years, centuries. Through mass extinctions and quiet ages. Through climate shifts and evolutionary sparks. The sediment thickens. Each layer is thin, fragile, almost nothing on its own. But together, they become a record. At the bottom of ancient seas, silt hardens into mudstone. Mudstone becomes shale. Pressure turns soft into solid. What once drifted now becomes a page. What once dissolved into the current is pressed into permanence. This is the Earth's archive. A library written in mineral grains, chemical traces, and fossilized fragments. The ocean floor becomes a chronicle, not of events, but of presence, of what was there when and for how long. And though these stories are buried, they are not gone. We drill into them, slice them open, study the ratio of oxygen isotopes, the pollen grains trapped in clay, the volcanic ash smeared between shells. Each stratum becomes a sentence, each chemical change, a punctuation. Some layers are smooth, others are chaotic. Some hold evidence of warmth, others whisper of ice, and some thin, dark bands hold extinction. Moments where the falling particles changed suddenly, where life collapsed, where everything above the ocean fell silent, and the rain of organic matter stopped. Then slowly it resumed. The clock did not break. It just hesitated. Could it be that memory has weight? That what is remembered presses downward, settles, and leaves a mark we cannot erase? It is strange to think that the past is beneath us, not behind us. That the ground we walk on is layered with decisions the planet made when we were still stardust. That below every step is a silence made solid. And stranger still, that the deepest parts of the ocean floor are younger than the hills. Because Earth recycles. Tectonic plates slide beneath one another. Ocean crust, heavy and saturated, is dragged down into the mantle at subduction zones. A slow, grinding descent where yesterday is melted and remade. The oldest sediments are devoured, their records erased, their stories rewritten in magma. Not all of the archive survives, but some does, trapped in mountain ranges that were once seabeds, in limestone cliffs, in the folded stone of desert canyons. The pages of the sea are lifted, tilted, exposed to wind and eye. The record resurfaces. We find ancient ripple marks, frozen in rock, fossil burrows, layers of iron, of chalk, of ash, all of it telling time, not like a watch, but like a tree ring, like a glacier, like something that only speaks if we wait long enough to listen. And sometimes, even now, sediments still fall. The ocean is always writing, always remembering. Could it be that nothing is truly lost, only buried? And if every layer holds a story, how many have we yet to uncover? How many are beneath us now, just waiting for the light to return? Some of them will never see the light again. They lie beneath stone thicker than memory, beneath oceans that fold in on themselves, beneath crust that seems still, but never is. Because Earth does not sleep. Even when it appears quiet, even when the forests bloom and the shorelines feel fixed, something beneath is always moving. Not fast, not sudden, but steady, immense, unstoppable. The crust itself drifts. We think of continents as permanent, unshakable landmasses, carved and named and mapped. But they are not permanent. They are passengers, carried by plates of lithosphere that glide across the surface of the Earth like slow rafts of stone on a sea of hotter, denser mantle. This is plate tectonics, the planet's ballet. The movements are glacial but vast, centimeters per year, barely more than the pace of fingernail growth. And yet, over millions of years, it is enough to rip oceans apart. Enough to build mountain ranges taller than weather. Enough to erase coastlines, crash landmasses together, and leave coral fossils thousands of feet above sea level. Once, all land was gathered together, a single supercontinent called Pangaea. Before that, another Rodinia. And before that, others still, now lost to subduction and time. Continents merge. They split. They drift apart. They collide. They reshape the face of the world again and again, like a puzzle that forgets its last solution. And with each rearrangement, life adapts. Climates shift. Oceans reroute. Evolution stumbles, recovers, accelerates. It's hard to see from here, from the human scale, from the calendar year. But the evidence is everywhere. In matching rock layers found on separate continents. In identical fossils on coastlines now an ocean apart. In magnetic minerals frozen in ancient lava flows, all pointing in directions that no longer make sense, unless the land beneath them moved. Could it be that the Earth remembers not just through what it buries, but through how it moves? That motion itself is memory? There is something deeply humbling about the idea that the ground beneath us is not fixed. That the land we call home was once somewhere else entirely. And that one day it will be again. We walk on restless ground. Sometimes this movement erupts, volcanoes, earthquakes, sudden reminders of the slow pressure building beneath. But more often it unfolds invisibly. A continent shifting, unnoticed. A mountain range lifting year by year. A rift valley widening by inches. And beneath it all, convection churns. The mantle flows not like water, but like slow, solid taffy, carrying heat from the core outward. That heat rises, spreads, and cools, dragging the plates above with it. This is what powers the continents. This is what keeps the crust alive. If you could speed up time, the Earth's surface would ripple and dance. Mountains would rise like slow breath. Oceans would bloom and vanish. Deserts would turn to seabeds and back again. It is not chaos. It is choreography. A planet learning how to express itself. And still, through it all, life holds on. Adapts. Moves with the land. Species carried across drifting plates. Seeds scattered on wind that blows from different directions with each new arrangement. What looks like stability is, in truth, a delicate balancing act on shifting ground. Even now, the continents are moving. India presses into Asia, lifting the Himalayas higher. The Atlantic slowly widens. California drifts northward. Australia wanders alone. We do not feel it, but it is happening. Could it be that everything we build, our cities, our stories, even our memories, are written on pages that slide beneath our feet? And if the continents themselves are travelers, then what does that make us? Not settlers, perhaps, but passengers, riding slowly across the face of a living world, shaped by forces older than language. And if the land can drift, what else might be adrift, waiting to come together again? Maybe what drifted next was warmth. Because there came a time, not once but perhaps more than once, when Earth forgot how to keep herself warm. When the breath of volcanoes slowed, when the balance of gases slipped too far, when sunlight weakened just enough, and the world surrendered to cold. We call it Snowball Earth. Not a metaphor, not a season, but a silence so complete, so white, so long, that it swallowed oceans. Ice began at the poles, as it often does. But it didn't stop. It crept downward, inch by inch, year by year, expanding across continents, across coasts, over the surface of the sea. It thickened, brightened, reflected sunlight back into space, and in doing so, invited more cold. A feedback loop of frost. Soon, the equator, the very middle of the planet, was encased in ice. Glaciers floated above tropical waters. Light touched the surface and was thrown away. The Earth did not absorb warmth. It reflected it. And the oceans, once teeming with microbial blooms, once rich with cyanobacteria and drifting organic clouds, began to still. The surface froze. Not thin ice, but thick, miles thick, a planetary shell of frost. Beneath it, the oceans remained liquid barely, pressed between seafloor heat and glacial ceiling. Life, if it hoped to survive, had to shrink, to slow, to hide. And some did. In the dark, at the bottom of the sea, hydrothermal vents whispered warmth. Geothermal fissures poured minerals into the blackness. Around them, in narrow halos of survivable temperature, microbial life endured, clung, persisted, not because it was strong, but because it was there. Could it be that survival is not about dominance, but nearness? That being close to warmth, even in the deepest cold, is enough? The frozen silence above was complete. Imagine it standing on the surface if one could. The horizon white in every direction. Sky pale with dust. Air dry and still. No waves. No wind. No sound but your own breath. And beneath your feet water. Life. Motion. The hidden future. We do not know exactly what triggered this deep freeze. Perhaps volcanic CO2 drawdown. Perhaps continental positions disrupted ocean currents. Perhaps the sun, still younger then, burned a little dimmer. Likely it was many things, because the earth is delicate in her balance, stable for eons until one thread is tugged too hard. And once ice ruled, it stayed. Not for seasons, not for centuries, but for millions of years. Longer than cities, longer than mammals, long enough for entire lineages of life to be erased. Long enough for silence to seem permanent. But not long enough to end the story. Volcanoes still rumbled beneath the crust. Carbon still leaked into the air. Slowly, very slowly, the greenhouse effect began to rise again. Trapped gases warmed the atmosphere. The thick ice reflected less. Melting began at the edges. Meltwater pooled. Clouds formed. Heat held. And one day, slowly, not suddenly, the ice began to recede. The shell cracked. The white softened. The blue returned. It must have been a violent return. Runoff flooding the oceans. Weather roaring back to life. Storms redistributing energy like wild conversation after a long silence. But even in the chaos, life emerged again. Not just survivors, but adapters. Cells that had endured now expanded, diversified, took advantage of the thaw. Maybe it needed to happen this way. Maybe the freeze reset something. Cleared space, created pressure, forced innovation. Could it be that even stillness can spark change? The earth remembers the cold. We see its evidence in glacial scars, in isotopic signatures, in rocks formed under pressure and time. We see it in dropstones, boulders carried by icebergs, released into deep-sea mud. We see it in the gaps, because silence leaves traces too. And now, when we feel winter brush against our windows, when frost gathers on the edge of the morning, we're touching the memory of a world that once froze itself entirely. And if that deep cold could pass, what else might be possible? Possibility often arrives quietly, not with fanfare or form, but as a subtle shift. A change in softness, a new shape beneath the water, something unfamiliar resting on the seafloor, where time moves slowly and light forgets to visit. This was the Ediacaran period, the hush before the complexity to come. And in this hush, life was soft. Before bones, before shells, before teeth or claws or even clear direction. There were creatures that drifted more than they moved, that settled more than they swam. Flattened ovals, ribbed discs, frond-like bodies, rooted to microbial mats. Living, yes, but not as we would recognize it. They left behind no bones to study, no jaws to admire, only impressions, faint outlines pressed into fine-grained sediment, like a memory stamped into wet sand just before the tide returns. Dickinsonia, Spriggina, Tribrachidium, names we gave them long after their world was gone. Names spoken aloud in rooms filled with fossil slabs and patient light, but never names they carried themselves. They were here, and then not. And what they were is still a question. Were they animals? Algae? Something else entirely. A lineage that began and ended before bones could hold its shape? We don't know. We may never know. Because entropy does what it always does. It wears down. It smooths edges. It dissolves detail. The past slips from grasp, even when it leaves traces. But the Ediacaran twilight remains, soft and strange, like the feeling just before sleep. A time of experimentation, of unfolding, of forms that seem to ask, what else could a body be? Could it be wide and unmoving? Could it be radially symmetrical without front or back? Could it survive without mouth or muscle, absorbing nutrients straight through its skin? Here, in this in-between time, after the snowball thaw, but before the Cambrian burst, the ocean was a cradle of gentle oddities. And though they were soft, they were not simple. Some formed communities. Some may have moved, ever so slightly. Some left tracks, the first evidence of choice, of behavior, of direction. They shaped the seafloor. They filtered the water. They prepared the world for what came next. Could it be that softness, too, is strength? That being temporary doesn't mean being insignificant? We tend to measure life in what lasts, in bones, in monuments, in data that resists decay. But much of what matters has no skeleton, passes through. It brushes against us and is gone. Still, it leaves a feeling, and the Ediacaran left its feeling pressed into stone. Fossils from this era are rare, but where they exist, in the cliffs of Newfoundland, the hills of Namibia, the red beds of Australia, they speak. Not loudly, but clearly. They remind us that evolution is not a straight line, that the path to complexity winds and folds, sometimes vanishing altogether. That before armor, there was openness. Before defense, there was vulnerability. And maybe that, too, was a kind of beauty, a whole age defined by softness, by forms that tried something new, and then passed into silence. And in that silence, space opened. Because after softness came structure. After stillness, motion. And just beyond the edge of this chapter, something is stirring. Not louder, but clearer. More defined. Life preparing to write in firmer lines. But here, for just a little longer, we float in the quiet. Among creatures that lived without skeletons. That whispered without sound. That changed everything, then disappeared. And if they, too, were forgotten for a while, how many other lives, other experiments, have come and gone, their stories erased before the first stone could remember? And then, something remembered, not in stone, not yet, but in cells, in code, in the quiet machinery of life itself. Because after billions of years spent in the soft shadows of possibility, something changed. Something opened, not all at once, not with thunder or fire, but with light. We call it the Cambrian explosion. A phrase that suggests drama, violence, suddenness. But it wasn't an explosion. It was a dawn, a slow kindling of complexity, a bloom of form across the canvas of the sea. Here, in these shallow waters, in the early morning of evolution, bodies began to do something they had never done before. They hardened. Shells appeared thin at first, then thicker. Armor against a world that was growing more aware. Chitin, calcium, structure. Lines drawn between inside and out. And eyes. Not metaphorical ones. Actual light-sensitive organs. The gift of sight, for the first time in Earth's story. Simple lenses at first, crude but functional, enough to detect shadow, to find food, to flee. Because now there were mouths, jaws, teeth, predators. This was new. For eons, life had simply existed. Absorbing, floating, passively gathering what it needed. But now, for the first time, some forms chased. Some forms chose. Some forms defended. And evolution, slow, patient evolution, quickened its breath. Across the seabed, trilobites scuttled in growing numbers, their segmented bodies and compound eyes adapted for motion and perception. Anomalocaris, a strange, shrimp-like predator, swept through the water with curling graspers and wide, gaping jaws. Worms dug, sponges filtered, mollusks grazed. Echinoderms, distant ancestors of starfish, began their radial experiments. Every shape seemed to be tested. every blueprint explored. Could it be that life had been practicing all along? That the Ediacaran hush was rehearsal, a quiet phase of trial and error, waiting for the right threshold to be crossed? Maybe it was oxygen. Maybe it was the breakup of continents, new nutrient flows, changing temperatures. Maybe it was simply time, a cascade triggered by countless unseen steps. But once it began, it didn't stop. The fossil record grows richer here almost suddenly. Form becomes visible. Creatures leave behind not just impressions, but parts of themselves. Hard parts, durable parts, teeth and spines and shells that could survive the deep press of time. We can see them now in slate and shale, in limestone outcrops, in the famous Burgess Shale of Canada or the Changjiang deposits of China. A window into a world that felt, for the first time, awake. But even awake, it was still quiet. There was no noise in this ocean. No birdsong, no breathing, no voice. Only movement, only gesture, only the flicker of eyes beneath the surface, noticing light. And if eyes can notice light, what else might they notice? Suddenly, there is a sense of attention, of life responding not just to chemical gradients or touch, but to the visible world. A landscape becomes something to be seen. Space becomes something to be navigated. Danger becomes something to avoid. Food becomes something to hunt. And with that, behavior emerges. Decision. Not thought, not yet, but choice. The stirrings of intention, carried in fin and limb. It's easy to romanticize this moment, to treat it like a beginning. But it was not a beginning. It was a reveal. Life had been here all along. What changed was not existence, but expression. And the ocean, once a quiet drift of soft forms, became a mosaic of purpose. Not perfect, not peaceful, but full. And perhaps that fullness, that sudden presence of doing, is what gives the Cambrian its light. Not light from the sun, which had always been there, but a light from within life itself. A kind of noticing, a kind of emergence. Could it be that awareness begins not with thought, but with the ability to see? And if so, what else was beginning to notice? What else, beneath the ripples of a Cambrian sea, was preparing to rise? What rose next did not ripple or hunt. It did not see or swim or breathe as we do. It did not chase or flee or leave fossilized jaws in the ocean mud. It simply reached, and it reached not with speed, but with stillness. Because while life had long ruled the seas, the land remained bare. A domain of stone, wind, and light. For billions of years, continents were silent places. No leaves, no roots, no birdsong, just rock and weather, just erosion without witness. Until one day, or rather across a million days, green appeared. Not suddenly, not in trees, not at first, but in mosses, tiny mats of photosynthetic life, clinging to the edge of freshwater pools, to cracks in the stone, to places where moisture lingered just long enough. These early colonizers were the first to soften land. Their threads, primitive roots, began breaking rock into mineral-rich crumbs. They secreted acids. They held water. And slowly, silently, they began to make something the earth had never known before: soil. It was the beginning of land as we think of it, not just surface, but surface with memory. Ground that could hold, support, nourish. And then, much later, came the trees. Not modern trees, not yet. These were tall, yes, some reaching 30 meters or more, but strange. Hollow. Branchless at first. Their trunks thick with rings, their roots shallow but wide. Names like Archaeopteris and Lepidodendron, spoken now in the cool air of museums and outcrops, but once whispered only by wind through fern-like leaves. They did not flower. They did not fruit. But they towered. They formed the first forests, vast, green stillness stretching across floodplains and deltas. They filtered the sun. They held the rain. They inhaled carbon and exhaled oxygen into a sky that had never breathed so deeply. And the planet changed. Atmospheric oxygen rose. Global temperatures shifted. The land, once inert, began to regulate. A feedback loop of life and climate emerged, rooted in the act of staying. Because that is what the first forests did. They stayed. They did not run from drought or fire or shadow. They endured, grew taller, fell, decayed. And in their falling they created new layers, peat and coal and carbon locked away in future stone. Could it be that transformation begins not with motion, but with patience? These forests were not loud. There was no rustle of animals, no chirp or call. Insects had begun to arrive, early centipedes, millipedes, wingless forms crawling among roots, but vertebrates had not yet come ashore. There were no footsteps, only trunks, leaves, spores drifting on air. A silence unlike any silence we know. Not empty, but complete. To walk through it now, if we could, would feel like drifting through a dream half-formed. Light filtering through strange canopies. Shadows long and unfamiliar. Air heavy with moisture, rich with oxygen. Every surface damp and layered in moss. No sound but the breath of wind and the occasional fall of a leaf onto spongy ground. And yet, beneath the soil, the future waited. Roots tangled. Fungi spread in vast underground webs, exchanging minerals for sugars in the first great symbioses. The land was becoming not just green but interconnected. We tend to think of conquest in terms of motion, of dominance. But life's conquest of land began with quiet growth, with anchoring, with trees writing themselves into the planet one root at a time. And in doing so, they made space not just for themselves but for everything that would come after. For animals, for nests, for decay, for story. Could it be that trees are not just part of the world, but part of how the world remembers itself? Their rings hold droughts and seasons. Their roots shape rivers. Their fallen trunks become soil for what follows. They are not just alive, they are continuity. And once, long ago, they were the only sound on land. A sound we cannot hear, but which shaped the earth forever. And if silence can shape a world, what might it still be shaping now? Maybe it's shaping memory. Not in the way we think of it, not in thoughts or photographs or language, but in stone. Because sometimes, when a life ends, something lingers. Not the creature itself, not its voice, or its hunger, or its warmth, but its shape, the shadow, the gentle outline of where it once lay, the space it took up made permanent. We call it a fossil, but it's more than that. It's a trace, a translation, a moment when decay didn't finish the story. Fossilization is not the rule. It is the rare exception. Most things vanish. Bones are scattered. Flesh returns to soil. The rain takes what's left. Time smooths everything out. But sometimes, just sometimes, the mud remembers. A creature dies in just the right place. A calm riverbed. A low lake. A tidal flat where silt falls softly. The body is quickly buried, sealed away from air and scavengers. Pressure builds. Water seeps through, carrying minerals that begin to replace what was once bone, once shell, once soft and alive. Over years, thousands, millions, the body becomes rock. Not because it wanted to, but because the earth allowed it. And now, eons later, we find it. We split open slabs of shale and see the delicate ribs of a fish, the imprint of a fern, the curve of a trilobite's back pressed into stone like a fingerprint of deep time. It feels impossible, and yet, it's everywhere. In desert cliffs, in quarry walls, in limestone cracked by frost and sun. The dead, long gone, still whisper from beneath our feet. Could it be that fossils are the earth's way of dreaming, holding on to moments that meant nothing then, but everything now? Because these bones, these stony echoes, tell us what lived, where, and when. They tell us that rivers once flowed here, that forests once stood there, that creatures once moved through wetlands now buried beneath cities. And they tell us about loss. For every fossil we find, there are millions we don't. Entire lineages vanished without a trace. Whole ecosystems that left no evidence. What we know of the past is a fragment, stitched from lucky survivors, from preserved accidents. But perhaps that's enough. Perhaps these fragments are all we need to feel the weight of history. Not the full picture, just the shape of it. The suggestion. The sense that something once walked here, swam here, looked up at the same moon. In ancient lake beds we find bones curled in rest. limbs folded gently, as if sleep came just before stone. Sometimes footprints, sometimes feathers, sometimes even skin impressions, the softest things, somehow outlasting time. And in riverbeds we see layers like pages, flood after flood, each one laying down another sheet of memory. Life and death tangled in the flow. Mud remembering what the water tried to forget. Fossils are not perfect records. They are biased, incomplete, but they are real. And in their reality we glimpse not just what was, but what mattered. Because something mattered enough to stay. And if a creature's shape can be held in stone for hundreds of millions of years, what about us? What traces do we leave behind, unknowingly? What impressions form beneath our footsteps, waiting to be uncovered by eyes we'll never meet? Maybe we won't be remembered in fossils, but perhaps the Earth records more than we think. Perhaps in soil, in carbon, in isotopes, in dust, the planet remembers not just life, but how it moved. And if mud can hold a memory, what else might be silently keeping time? Sometimes memory ends abruptly, not because it's erased, but because there's suddenly no one left to remember. The story of life on Earth is not one of smooth continuation. It is not a steady climb. It is filled with collapses, with pages torn out, with endings that arrive without warning, without mercy. One of them came at the end of the Permian. We often call it the Great Dying, not because it was the first extinction, not because it was the last, but because it was the most complete. Roughly 90% of all species vanished. Not in a single day, not with a singular impact, but over thousands of years. A blink to the earth, a breath to deep time. A slow, suffocating burn. It began with fire. Massive volcanic eruptions in what is now Siberia tore open the crust, releasing vast fields of lava. Not as explosive mountains, but as sheets of molten rock that poured out across the land. For hundreds of thousands of years, the earth bled heat. But it wasn't the lava itself that ended things. It was what came with it. Gases, carbon dioxide, methane, sulfur, greenhouse gases spilled into the sky, thickening the atmosphere, warming the planet beyond recognition. Oceans grew acidic. Temperatures climbed. Rainforests withered. Coral reefs dissolved. The oxygen levels in the sea plummeted, creating vast, suffocating dead zones. And the air, once so carefully sculpted by cyanobacteria, began to turn against the life it once supported. It wasn't one cause. It was many. A cascade of consequences. Warming oceans, disrupted currents, poisoned rain. Entire ecosystems unraveled. Food chains collapsed. Species that had survived for millions of years simply didn't. Some died quickly. Others faded slowly. The world grew quiet. Fossil records from this time are hauntingly thin. Coral gaps, fern gaps, insect gaps. Whole branches of the tree of life snapped off and buried. And yet, the earth kept turning. Could it be that extinction, as painful as it feels, is part of the rhythm? Not because it's fair, not because it's needed, but because life, like fire, consumes what it grows, and sometimes it burns too hot. We forget that life doesn't only build upward. It also falls. It retreats. It starts over. And here, at the end of the Permian, life came closer to ending than ever before. But it didn't. In the aftermath, in the ash and the heat, something survived. Buried seeds, hardy microbes, scavengers, small things, simple things. Life curled inward, held its breath, and waited. And slowly, it returned. Not the same, never the same, but new, adapted, altered. The earth, scorched and trembling, began again. It's tempting to imagine extinction as destruction, but perhaps it's more like forgetting, clearing, pause in the narrative, a dark chapter that prepares space for the next one. Could it be that the earth forgets on purpose? That loss is written into its design. We don't know exactly how long it took to recover. Estimates range from millions to tens of millions of years. But eventually the world greened again. The seas calmed. New life appeared. And what rose from the ashes was strange. Different. full of possibility. This is what extinction leaves behind, not just absence but room. Room for reinvention, for redirection. Still, the cost remains. The fossils remind us. The gaps are not just data, they are echoes. Names we'll never know. Shapes we'll never see. And even now, when we study the layers of rock that mark the Permian's end, we find soot. We find coal ash. We find signs of fire that burned not just forests, but time itself. And if time can burn, what does it take to start it over? It takes patience and silence. And then, eventually, it takes footsteps, because time, once burned, does not rush to rebuild. It grows carefully, softly. Life returns first in the smallest ways. Ferns in the ash, insects in the shade, rivers winding their way through scorched valleys. The world, once emptied, begins to write again in green. And into that growing stillness, something stirs. A new lineage, a quiet breath, not yet giant, not yet thunderous, but destined. The first dinosaurs appear not as monsters, but as experiments. Small, two-legged creatures moving through undergrowth. Fast, alert, feathered in ways we wouldn't expect. They are not here to dominate. They are here to adapt. And they do. Over time, they change. They stretch. They rise. They grow into shapes we still marvel at. Long-necked titans grazing treetop canopies. Horned behemoths moving in quiet herds. Slender hunters tracing the scent of prey across ancient plains. They do not roar. They do not rage. They simply live. And in doing so, they become a part of Earth's rhythm. For over 150 million years, dinosaurs walked the land. That number is hard to hold in the mind. It is longer than the time between their extinction and now. Longer than the age of mammals. Longer than human memory. They are not visitors. They are home. Forests rise around them. Shallow seas flood inland, retreat again, then return. Flowers bloom for the first time. Insects take flight. The world becomes more complex, more colorful, more alive. And still, the giants walk. In every ecosystem, on every continent, they take part, not as rulers but as participants. Herbivores graze in morning light. Predators stalk the edges of dusk. Hatchlings emerge from eggs no larger than a coconut, blinking into a world rich with scent and motion. The air is different, thicker perhaps, warmer, oxygen-rich. The continents have shifted again, gathering into new shapes, breaking apart once more. Volcanic plains rise. Lush wetlands spread. We imagine dinosaurs as beasts of thunder, dramatic, savage, towering. But they were also subtle, social, curious, and in many ways peaceful. Could it be that size does not mean violence? That being large simply means being tuned to a slower rhythm? Some of them are immense. Argentinosaurus, perhaps the largest land animal ever to live, stretching more than 100 feet from nose to tail. Others are as small as chickens. The variety is astonishing. Feathered, scaled, crested, armored. Each one a response to its environment. Each one a solution. Evolution, again, in motion. But it is not just their bones that matter. It is their presence. Their weight on the ground. The way their footsteps shaped riverbanks. Pressed into mud. Hardened into fossilized trackways that we can now follow, stone after stone. We do not walk alongside them, but we walk where they walked. And something in us stirs when we imagine it. That long neck dipping to drink. That tail sweeping the fern floor. That eye, ancient and amber, pausing to look. At what? Did they sense time? Did they know change? Or were they, like all life, simply alive, simply present until they weren't? The age of dinosaurs was not a moment. It was an era. A stretch of life so long that our own story would be a flicker in comparison. And yet it ended. Not yet, not here, but we are nearing the threshold. And if the earth can hold giants for so long, what happens when their footsteps stop? They stop suddenly. Not in pain, perhaps. Not all at once. But in silence. Because the end of the dinosaurs did not arrive on foot. It fell from above. Sudden. Burning. Uninvited. a visitor from the edges of the solar system, traveling for millions of years to reach a single moment. It began as light, a growing streak in the sky, brighter than the sun, seen perhaps by ancient birds, by small mammals huddled in the dusk, by nothing at all, because by the time it arrived, the world had no idea what was coming. The asteroid struck near what is now the Yucatan Peninsula. It was 6 miles wide, but it moved so fast it carried the energy of billions of bombs. Faster than sound, hotter than fire. The sea boiled, the earth shook, forests collapsed in waves, rock turned to vapor, and then came the ash, dust, smoke, pulverized stone, flung high into the atmosphere, carried around the globe, blocking the sun, turning day into night for weeks, months, longer. Photosynthesis slowed, then stopped. Plants withered, the food chain snapped, and with it the age of giants ended. We call it the Cretaceous Paleogene extinction, a dividing line in the planet's memory. It marks not just the death of the dinosaurs, but the close of a chapter written over 150 million years. It is not a story of punishment. It is a story of interruption, because the asteroid didn't target the Earth. It simply arrived. It existed, and in existing it changed everything. Could it be that not all endings are caused? Some simply happen. And yet this one left echoes. A thin layer of clay, found all over the world, rich in iridium. A metal rare on Earth, but common in asteroids. It marks the moment of impact like a fingerprint pressed into stone. A horizon of loss. A signal. A line. Beneath it, a world filled with dinosaur fossils, with ancient flora, with vanished forms. Above it, absence. And then, eventually, something else. Because extinction, as devastating as it is, creates space. For the small, for the quiet, for the unnoticed. Tiny mammals, once hidden in roots and burrows, began to spread. Seeds germinated in the cooling ash. Birds lifted again into sky cleared by time. The earth, always grieving, always beginning, moved forward. And we carry it with us. The memory of giants. Not just their bones, but their awe, their scale, their grace, their quiet. Even now, when we imagine prehistoric life, it is their shapes that fill our dreams. The long tail, the curved claw, the massive footprint fossilized in ancient riverbeds. Their story did not vanish. It became part of ours. In myths, in science, in childhood wonder. Maybe we remember them because the stars do. Because the very object that ended their reign still circles above us. Not the same rock, but its kind. Comets, asteroids, messengers from elsewhere. Reminders that we are never truly alone in the cosmos. Every night sky is filled with them. Points of light, frozen time, potential. And every shooting star, every brief burn across the dark, carries with it the possibility of change. Could it be that we are not just Earth's memory, but the stars as well? Could it be that what falls from the sky is not always ending, but becoming? And if one falling star could reshape life forever, what else waits in that darkness? What waited in that darkness was us. Not in the shape we now know. Not upright, not speaking, not shaping stone into meaning. But in the small, furred forms that crept between roots and curled in the hollows of fallen logs. Creatures with warm blood and quiet breath. Alive not because they were strong, but because they were unnoticed. When the giants fell, the world grew still. Ash drifted down like snowfall, soft and choking. Forests lay broken. The air was cooler. The light, thinner. A bruised earth turned slowly, wounded but not finished. And from this dim quiet, mammals emerged. They had been here already, for millions of years, living in the shadows of dinosaurs, underfoot, behind ferns, beneath the canopy. They had survived by being small, by being awake at night, by nursing their young, by waiting. Now there was space, and they did not rush into it. They explored carefully, filling the empty niches one heartbeat at a time. Some took to the trees. Some stayed low to the ground. Some returned to the water. Shapes diversified. Sizes shifted. The world, once ruled by scale, now rewarded adaptability. Could it be that resilience isn't loud? That it doesn't always roar or conquer, but instead persists? The early mammals were modest, shrew-like, sharp-nosed, soft-bodied. They sniffed and climbed and tunneled. Their brains were growing, their senses tuning. They remembered warmth, even in the cold. They remembered the shape of their young, even in darkness. And slowly, they began to dream. Not as we dream, not yet, but in the stirrings of curiosity, of awareness, of learning. The mammalian brain was a different kind of tool. Not faster, not stronger, but flexible, emotional, capable of imagination. A leap had begun, not upward, but inward. And in that inwardness, something remarkable took root. Social bonds grew stronger. Communication grew richer. Memory deepened. These were not the largest animals, but they were beginning to remember each other, to care, to raise, to plan. And the earth, still healing, held them gently. Oceans calmed. Forests regrew. Insects buzzed again. Flowers spread their petals into new light. And the mammals rose with it, not in a sudden climb, but in a branching path. Marsupials, primates, hoofed runners, burrowing quiet things. Some would go nowhere. Others would give rise to something unforeseen. It would be millions of years before the first human ancestor stood upright. But the blueprint was here, sketched in the ash, nestled in warm burrows, etched into soft brains dreaming beneath the stars. And the stars still watched, because perhaps what the earth loses, the sky remembers. Perhaps memory isn't only written in stone, but in survival. The mammals didn't need to inherit power. They inherited possibility. And they waited, not in dormancy, but in motion, steady, curious, alive. And if they could rise from the ashes of extinction, what might rise from us? Not everything that rises does so in fire. Some things return in cold. There are moments in Earth's memory when the warmth steps back. Not completely, not all at once, but enough. The air cools. The clouds shift. The snow that falls in winter no longer melts in summer. Year by year it stays. Layers gather. Weight builds. And slowly, the ice returns. Not a frost, not a storm, but a presence. A glacier is not just frozen water. It is movement disguised as stillness. A river of ice so slow you might mistake it for silence. But it moves, carves, it shapes, teaches, because ice, when it stays long enough, changes everything it touches. It begins in the high places, in mountain cradles, where snow compacts into crystal, into density, into blue-white masses that feel more like stone than water. And when the weight becomes too much, it begins to flow. Downward, outward, forward. It does not rush. It does not leap. Presses. And beneath that pressing, the land yields. Mountains are shaved. Valleys deepened. Boulders lifted and carried like forgotten thoughts. Ridges flattened. Lakes born. The ice is not cruel, it is methodical, patient, persistent, and it leaves behind stories. U-shaped valleys that once held ancient rivers. Moraines, ridges of debris marking the glacier's slow retreat. Striations scratched into bedrock, telling of direction, of pressure, of passage. Erratics, lone boulders resting far from their origin, delivered like quiet gifts from distant heights. The earth remembers ice not through temperature, but through form. And as it comes and goes, through ice ages and interglacials, through tens of thousands of years, the planet breathes with it. A slow inhale, a slower exhale. Could it be that the land learns through pressure? That the shape of valleys is a kind of memory held not in thought but in depth? And during these colder pulses, life adapts again. Mammoths tread softly across snowy plains. Giant sloths roam frost-hardened forests. Early humans light fires at the edge of glaciers, wrapping themselves in fur, watching the white walls gleam under moonlight. We often imagine the past as warm, as jungles and volcanoes, as sunlit oceans. But much of Earth's recent story has been shaped by cold. And the cold has taught patience. In glacial cycles, time stretches. What feels urgent becomes small. The glacier does not hurry. It moves only when it is ready. It does not need to be seen to leave its mark. And when it retreats, when warmth finally returns, it does so reluctantly, melting upward, pulling back, revealing the new world it shaped in its passing. Grass follows. Rivers find new paths. Animals migrate. People wander into freshly carved lands, not knowing the ice came before them, not knowing they walk in its absence. The lessons remain. That change can come without noise. That the deepest transformations are often the slowest. That nothing is too strong to yield, not even stone. And when we look at the world today, at the fjords, the Great Lakes, the carved faces of ancient cliffs, we are looking into a past written by cold hands. Ice does not forget. It simply waits for its time. And if it comes again, as it has before, what will we learn this time? What in us is still unshaped, still waiting to be carved into something new? Maybe what shapes us is rhythm. Not a single moment, not a single shift, but a pattern so slow, so vast, we forget it's there, until it speaks through the seasons, through the tides, through the air itself. Because Earth does not keep time with clocks, keeps time with cycles. The climate is not fixed. It is not still. It breathes, pulses, warm, cold, warm again. We tend to think of climate as background, something steady, something passive. But the planet's temperature has always been in motion. It rises, it falls, sometimes over centuries, sometimes over millennia. Each fluctuation reshapes the world in quiet, far-reaching ways. The evidence is buried in ice. In the frozen heart of Greenland, of Antarctica, of ancient glaciers still holding the breath of ages. Scientists drill deep into these ice sheets, pulling out slender cores of layered frost. A vertical timeline, compressed snow becoming time itself. Each layer traps more than water. It holds bubbles of ancient air. With them, we read the past. Carbon dioxide levels, methane, dust, volcanic ash, isotopes that tell us how warm the world was, how much sunlight reached the ground, how the winds moved. A heartbeat, a pulse. Across hundreds of thousands of years, we see the pattern glacial, interglacial, glacial again. Not random, not chaotic, but rhythmic, responsive, tied to the tilt of the planet, the wobble of its axis, the shape of its orbit around the sun. Milankovitch cycles, we call them now, a kind of planetary choreography, a dance too wide for any single lifetime to witness, but one that continues no matter who is watching. Could it be that climate is not just change, but music, that the earth sings, slowly, through heat and frost? When the ice retreats, forests bloom. Rainfall returns. Species migrate north. When the ice advances, deserts expand. Oceans shrink. Life adapts or disappears. And still, the pulse continues. In the cores, we see abrupt shifts, rapid warming after deep cold. A sudden surge in greenhouse gases. A spike in dust, in pollen, in volcanic soot. Clues that change can be both gradual and shockingly fast. Sometimes the planet stutters. Sometimes the rhythm breaks. And in those breaks, extinctions happen. Floods, droughts, migration, innovation. Life responds not always by flourishing, but by transforming. And here we are now, living inside one of those pulses. An interglacial warm period. A breath of calm between ice ages. A time that feels normal only because it's all we've ever known. But the cores remind us, normal is temporary. The rhythm continues whether or not we're listening. And now, as we add carbon to the air at speeds the planet has never seen before, the question becomes, are we moving with the rhythm or against it? Have we become another pulse? Another spike in the record? Another sharp layer that future eyes will read, wondering what we knew? Because the ice remembers. It does not record opinion. Only chemistry. Only reality. And if it melts, it tells a story too, not just of temperature, but of imbalance. Of feedback loops triggered too quickly to contain. Of time running forward faster than the land can hold. But perhaps the lesson isn't fear. Perhaps the lesson is attention. To see climate not as enemy or victim, but as rhythm. as the slow voice of a living world asking us to listen. And if we can feel the pulse beneath our feet, in the wind, in the turning of the seasons, maybe we can begin to hear what's coming next. And if climate has a memory, do we? Maybe we do, but not in the way we think. We remember birthdays and borders, the names of cities, the sound of voices. But the earth remembers us differently. It doesn't carry our stories in language. It carries them in residue and ruins. Because whether we realize it or not, we are already becoming fossils. Not just in bone, though bone too will remain in some distant strata yet to form, but in plastic, in glass, in concrete pressed deep into the ground, in the imprint of our machines, our metals, our networks, in layers of silicon dust. A future archaeologist, whoever or whatever they are, won't find our ideas. They'll find our leftovers. The age of humans, some call it. The Anthropocene. A word that suggests we are not just inhabitants of this time, but authors of it. Shapers of the layer now forming beneath our cities, beneath our oceans, beneath our feet. Geology moves slowly, but not so slowly that it hasn't noticed us. We've left traces in every corner of the biosphere. Microplastics in the bellies of deep-sea creatures. Fly ash from power plants embedded in polar snow. Radioactive isotopes from nuclear tests scattered across sediments, marking the mid-20th century like a flag planted in stone. We are writing a new layer, not intentionally, not carefully, but persistently. And what will it look like? A thin band of chemical chaos? A flash of strange materials never seen before or again? A sudden surge of carbon, of aluminum, of long-decayed molecules once part of tires, toothbrushes, phones? Will our cities leave behind bones of steel? Will our satellites one day fall and rest as rusted stars in the fossil record? It's humbling to realize that in the context of deep time, we are not the top of the pyramid, we are a slice. A chapter. A layer. We think of fossils as ancient, but they begin the moment something ends. And in every landfill, every buried power line, every forgotten storage vault, the process has already begun. Fossilization is not just for bones. It's for everything the earth chooses to keep. And the earth is always choosing, not consciously but consistently. Takes what resists decay. Keeps what falls beneath notice. It preserves what the present leaves behind in its rush to become future. Could it be that our legacy isn't what we intend, but what we leave? Maybe the most durable thing we've ever made isn't our art or our architecture, but plastic grocery bags. Maybe 1,000,000 years from now, a thin line of polymer in ocean rock will tell our story better than any monument. We are used to thinking of fossils as noble, as sacred remnants of the past. But fossils are also mundane. They are footprints, droppings, scraps. They are the ordinary caught in extraordinary conditions. And so are we. Already, the technosphere, all the physical things we've made, outweighs the biomass of all living organisms. There is more concrete than tree, more asphalt than riverbank. We are not just part of the world. We are now one of its geological forces. But what kind of layer are we making? Is it a scar? A signature? A question? Will it say we were here briefly and burned bright? Or that we learned to listen, to turn technology from fire into shelter, from noise into memory? And if someone far in the future holds a fragment of our world in their hands, a shard of glass, a piece of plastic, a fossilized circuit, will they wonder who we were? Or will they already know because they are made from what we left behind? Maybe that's all legacy really is, a layer. And if we're already in the rock, what story do we want it to tell? Stories fade, not because they are weak, but because everything does. Every structure, every form, every signal, every breath, eventually returns to stillness. Not as punishment, not as failure, but as a law. A quiet rule beneath all things, as old as the universe itself. We call it entropy. It's not destruction exactly. It's dispersion. The tendency for order to become disorder, for neatness to unravel, for heat to spread, energy to thin, patterns to dissolve. Even memory decays. Even the clearest line blurs with time. You can see it in a crumbling wall, in a frayed thread, in the way ink fades on old paper. But it's also there in deeper things, in the loss of data from ancient rocks, in the way DNA accumulates mistakes, in the fact that the planet itself forgets most of its beginnings. Entropy doesn't wear a face, but it wears a clock. Not one that ticks, but one that slides. Slow, certain, unstoppable. The Earth has forgotten more than it remembers. Early oceans, their shapes, their contents, their shifting tides are mostly gone. The first crust? Recycled into mantle. The earliest rain? Evaporated, remixed, fallen again and again. Even fossils, those symbols of endurance, are susceptible. They erode. They fracture. They're lost in landslides, dissolved in acid, broken beneath the tread of time. Every archive, even stone, is impermanent. And yet, not all is lost. Some things resist. Not forever, but longer than expected. Zircon crystals hold isotopic truths from 4 billion years ago. Deep cave formations track rainfall across the rise and fall of empires. Coral rings echo seasons long vanished. Memory is never perfect, but it is persistent, and we are part of that persistence. We too unravel. Our thoughts decay. Our histories distort. But we keep telling. We write. We record. We try to remember what matters, even as the edges blur. Could it be that life itself is a rebellion against forgetting? That to live, to grow, to reflect, to build is to momentarily reverse the slide? Of course, entropy always wins. The universe will cool. The stars will fade. Everything ordered will become scattered. But not yet. Not now. Now things still hold shape. Now, the planet still breathes, still records, still remembers in soil and snow and the subtle swirl of ocean currents. And there's something beautiful in knowing that memory doesn't need to last forever to be meaningful. It only needs to last long enough to guide, to echo, to inspire. And if the Earth forgets some things, the shape of its first mountains, the precise hue of its early sky, maybe that forgetting is part of its rhythm too. Maybe it lets go of what no longer serves, the way we do when dreams slip from morning light. And still, it holds on to some things. Fossils, ice cores, technofossils. You, me. Could it be that memory isn't about perfect preservation, but about selective wonder? Holding what speaks, letting the rest return to quiet. And if entropy wears a clock, perhaps wonder does too. A clock that doesn't measure endings, but attention. Because every moment we notice, truly notice, slows the slide just a little. And that may be enough. Some memories are hidden in the dark, waiting not to be seen, but to be heard. If you've ever stood at the mouth of a cave, that hush, that pause, that breath of cooler air, you know the feeling. The earth opens and you feel it not above you, but within you. A kind of invitation. A kind of hush that asks for quiet before entry. Deep within these caverns, time does not pass in the same way. There is no wind, no sun, no rush, and yet, something is always happening. Drip, drip, drip. Each drop of water holds a secret. Dissolved minerals, bits of stone, traces of the world above. When it falls, it leaves a tiny gift behind. A ring of calcite, a crystal bloom, a fingerprint of chemistry. Stalactites grow downward, one slow sigh at a time. Stalagmites rise up to meet them, patient as roots. And over thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands, of years, they form columns, curtains, delicate flows of stone that almost seem alive. We call them speleothems. But what they really are is language. Because inside their layers, those gentle bands of mineral, lies a record of rainfall, of drought, of volcanic ash, wind-blown dust, the faint signature of wildfires long gone. They remember temperatures. They remember the air. They remember when water was plentiful, and when it disappeared. Could it be that the Earth's most honest voices speak through rock, not words? In caves, we are surrounded by these voices. They don't demand attention. They offer it. To descend into one is to move backward through time. To walk past echoes of the Holocene into the Pleistocene and beyond. The cave does not care who enters. It only speaks to those who stay long enough to listen. and some of us have. For tens of thousands of years, humans have been drawn to these depths. Not for shelter, not always, but for something else, something older than language. On the cave walls of France and Spain we find handprints, deer, bison, dots and spirals, symbols painted in ochre and charcoal, flickering in torchlight, preserved by darkness. Did they see the stalactites? Did they hear the drips? Did they understand that they were not alone down there? That the stone was speaking slowly? We may never know, but the connection is undeniable. Something in us is drawn to slowness, to depth, to silence thick enough to become sacred. In recent decades, we've returned, this time with lasers, microscopes, isotopic tools. We've learned to read what the minerals are saying. A 1,000-year drought carved into calcite. A rapid shift in climate written in a single season's crystal growth. A volcanic winter recorded not in ash, but in absence. The cave does not forget, simply waits. And even now, while we live above, busy and bright and fast, the slow language continues. Drip, drip, drip. A reminder that time isn't always linear. That some stories are written not with urgency, but with patience. That memory, at its most enduring, is made in layers. And maybe that's the cave's gift to us. Not just knowledge, but pace. A slower breath. A longer view. A sense that what we do now will echo quietly into stone. And if the cave can speak, who else might be listening? Perhaps the better question is, who spoke before us? Because not all memory lives in stone. Some of it disappears, or sinks, or is covered by vines, by cities, by sea. And as we walk forward through time, we sometimes trip over what was left behind. A broken wall, a staircase that leads nowhere, a pattern in the soil visible only from the sky. Signs that someone or something once shaped the world before we arrived. But who? And when? We like to think we were the first, the original architects, the singular inventors of language, fire, story, stone. But Earth is old, and time is vast, and memory, as we've seen, is fragile. Could it be, we are not the first to build? There are places on this planet that stir that question. Ancient cities whose age strains the edges of known history. Underwater formations that mimic architecture, though their makers are unknown, if they had makers at all. Sites like Göbekli Tepe, built long before agriculture was supposed to exist. Or submerged ruins off the coasts of India and Japan, where stone shapes linger beneath the waves, tempting wonder. The mainstream story is cautious, and rightly so, but caution doesn't quiet the question. What if time forgets more than it remembers? What if civilizations, like individuals, can vanish not with fire but with erosion? Floods can swallow coastlines. Volcanoes can bury entire towns. Earthquakes, landslides, deserts, all can erase. And when enough erasure happens, even memory forgets what it once knew. Could it be that we are living above forgotten worlds? That beneath our roads lie the softened bones of languages never recorded? And if so, what did they know? We imagine ancient knowledge as mystical, but maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was practical. Maybe they understood the sky in a way we no longer do. Maybe they track cycles we've since ignored, lunar rhythms, magnetic shifts, subtle pulses of the planet that no longer register in our metrics. Maybe they whispered to stone and built with it, not in size but in harmony. And then, maybe they disappeared. Not dramatically, but gradually, like a tide going out and never returning. Some say there was an older cycle of civilization, long before the ones we've written in books. A prehistory erased not by ignorance, but by time itself. A spiral, not a line. Rise and fall. Memory and forgetting. We may never know for sure, but the idea hums beneath the surface, soft, like buried music. And maybe that's what matters most. Not the certainty but the curiosity. The willingness to look again. To listen for what's no longer obvious. To read not just what has survived, but what has slipped away. Because every civilization leaves footprints. But not all are made of stone. Some are written in soil chemistry, in pollen layers, in charcoal deposits from ancient fires, in unexpected alignments of ruins with stars that no longer rise in the same place. And some, perhaps, are written in us, in the myths we repeat, the dreams we carry, the strange familiarity we feel in places we've never been. Could it be that memory lingers even after the evidence is gone? That something within us still recognizes the echo of a forgotten home? We don't need to rewrite history to ask better questions. We just need to soften the edges, to hold space for the possibility that we are not the first to wonder, not the first to build, not the first to be forgotten. And if civilization is not a straight line, but a breath, then what might we be exhaling now? Maybe we are exhaling into the ground, not with words, not with monuments, but with layers, because beneath our feet lies more than dust, more than dirt, more than decay. It is something older, something wiser, a living fabric stitched from time itself. It is soil, and soil, for all its quietness, is one of the deepest forms of memory the earth keeps. Every handful contains the remnants of lives that came before, leaves that fell and broke down, roots that stretched and shriveled, insects, ash, pollen, bones. But it's more than decomposition. It's more than the absence of what once lived. It is remembrance, a palimpsest, a surface written on again and again, each new story pressed over the faint impressions of the last. A garden may look fresh, but its history lies just below. Ancient spores, charcoal from long-forgotten fires, the microscopic echo of footsteps. Soil is where the living and the dead meet, where transformation becomes texture, where everything that once rose toward the sun now leans toward darkness and feeds something else. Could it be that the ground beneath us is not just where we build, but where we are built? Because what grows here carries that memory. Plants are not born from nothing. They rise from layered time, absorbing nutrients, yes, but also absorbing story. Their roots trace invisible scripts beneath the surface, curling around the old, turning yesterday into tomorrow. In every forest, every field, every quiet backyard, the soil is telling a tale. Sometimes that tale is of richness, loam built over centuries, black with life, humming with the breath of microbes and earthworms. Other times it is of depletion, stripped lands, compacted dust, minerals stolen and never returned. Soil reflects how we live, how we care, how we forget, and in some places it remembers even more. In peat bogs, whole landscapes have preserved millennia of climate, pollen, even human remains. Bodies laid to rest in ancient rituals, still cradled in the earth's damp silence, skin and hair intact, as if time slowed down just enough to hold them. And in permafrost, the soil is frozen memory, locking in the breath of long-gone creatures, the air of past atmospheres, seeds waiting quietly for warmth that may never return. We walk over this history daily, rarely noticing. We pave it, we till it, we build upon it, but it remains, and it changes us too. There's a reason humans have always felt something sacred in touching the earth. To kneel in a field, to press a seed into the ground, to harvest food pulled from below. These are not just acts of survival. They are rituals of remembering, even if we don't know what we're remembering. Could it be that soil holds the soul of the planet? Not in some mystical way, but in a real physical truth. Everything that was, everything that lived, that fell, that faded becomes this, a layer, a richness, a texture that allows something else to begin. And as we dig, as we garden, as we walk barefoot through it, we touch that lineage. We belong to it, because one day we too will return to the soil, not as failure, but as offering. And the earth, as always, will remember. But if the earth remembers, does it also know? Does it have, somewhere beneath its layered silence, something like a self? Not a mind, not a voice, not a personality in the way we define it, but identity, a cohesion, a shape, a gravity that draws all its scattered memory inward and says, "This is still me." We tend to think of identity as a human thing, a name, a history, a way of telling the world what we are. But Earth has always held itself together, not through words, but through presence. Turns, pulses. It breathes in seasons. It grows crust and sheds it. It responds to pressure. It heals from wounds. Carries history in form, not story. But does that make it any less real? Could it be that identity doesn't begin in consciousness, but in coherence? The Earth has shape, Massachusetts rhythm. It has tendencies, cycles, preferences. Not random, not reactive, but patterned, balanced, responsive. Rain falls where mountains call it. Trees grow where soil invites them. Volcanoes rise where tension builds too long. Ocean currents travel ancient paths, looping through the same gyres century after century. All of it held together not by chance, but by gravity. And gravity, in its quiet insistence, might be the Earth's truest expression of self. Not an idea, but a pull. Everything is drawn inward. Dust, light, water, memory. The planet is not passive. It gathers, centers, composes, just as we do. Our own identity is shaped by forces we don't always understand: genetics, history, geography, pressure. Maybe Earth is not so different. Its selfhood shaped by collisions, cooling, cycles, loss, and return. We are made of it, after all. Every atom in our bodies once belonged to a star. Every mineral once part of a larger whole. We rise from the Earth like thoughts from a dreaming mind, temporary, distinct, but never separate. And if we have identity born from matter, why not the planet itself? Some traditions have long seen the Earth as alive, not metaphorically, but truly, as Gaia, as mother, as system, as spirit. Science does not speak in such terms, but it does not deny the patterns. Earth regulates its temperature. It cycles its water. It absorbs and releases. It balances, not always perfectly, but persistently. Not to serve us, but to stay itself. Could identity, then, be simply this, the ability to persist in form through time in the face of change? If so, the Earth is identity. A 4.5 billion year act of self-maintenance. Erosion pulls mountains down, but tectonics raise them again. Ice scours the land, but warmth brings regrowth. Extinction clears the slate, but life returns. Over and over, the planet becomes itself again. Not identical, but recognizable. Like a person aged, changed, scarred, yet somehow still known. Maybe identity is not what remains unchanged, but what survives change. And the Earth has survived everything. Fire, silence, impact, entropy. We try to define it in terms of data, temperature, crustal thickness, seismic behavior. But what if it is more than measurement? What if the Earth is not just an object in space, but an ongoing conversation with itself? A self shaped in magma, refined in riverbeds, stretched by tide and time. And if it has identity, how does ours fit within it? We are not separate. We are not above. We are not guests. We are expressions. Temporary arrangements of carbon, thought, and memory. Walking across a body much older than our species, yet carrying its story forward in new form. Could it be that we are the planet's way of looking back at itself? That identity in its highest form is reflection? And if we are Earth's reflection, fleeting, bright, unfinished, then perhaps our greatest responsibility is to remember it well. And to remember well, we must learn how to listen. Not just with ears or instruments, but with patience, with presence, with a willingness to read what the land has always been saying. Not in words, but in shape. Because Earth speaks in erosion. Not as a breaking, but as a translation. Every cliff, every canyon, every softly crumbling shoreline tells a story not of loss, but of time, of pressure eased, of sediment carried, of layers unwrapped like chapters exposed to the open air. Erosion is slow articulation. A mountain doesn't disappear, it reveals. A river doesn't destroy, it rewrites. A desert wind doesn't erase, it carves. And if we look closely, we begin to see meaning in the curves, the folds, the hollowed stone. The Grand Canyon isn't just a wound. It's a sentence millions of years long, written by a river learning how to speak through stone. And the hoodoos of the desert? They are punctuation marks, reminders that even the most fragile forms can endure when shaped with attention. Rain writes softer, but it still writes. Over rooftops, over roots, over roads. It follows gravity's whisper, pulling minerals from highlands to lowlands, building deltas, nourishing plains, teaching soil to flow, teaching life to follow. Coastlines change like moods. Tides nibble at the edge of continents, each wave a soft syllable. Over time, entire islands vanish. Others emerge. The land speaks to the sea, and the sea answers, and together they form a dialogue too long for human calendars. Could it be that what we call damage is just an unfamiliar language? That the cracks in a cliff face are not endings, but openings? We often fear erosion, we build against it, defend against it, name it as loss. But what if it's how the earth remembers? Not by holding tight, but by letting go slowly, by shedding layers, by whispering, "This was once a mountain, and now it is sand." And sand, too, has stories. Grains worn from ancient peaks, rolled across riverbeds, tossed by wind, polished by time. Each grain is a fragment of something larger, no longer complete, but still true. The language of erosion is subtle, but it's everywhere. In the ridges of your fingerprint, which mimic the flow of water. In the wear on ancient statues, their faces softened by centuries of wind. In the way old paths sink deeper into the earth with every passing step. It reminds us that permanence is not the only form of truth. That change is not the opposite of memory, it's how memory moves. And perhaps that's what erosion is teaching us. That nothing needs to last forever to matter. That stories don't end when they're altered. They begin again in new form. Could it be that we, too, are being shaped in ways we don't yet see? Not just by time, but by feeling, by seasons, by sorrow, by joy, by the slow, invisible winds of experience. And if we let ourselves be shaped, softened, not broken, what new truths might be revealed? The land has always known, and it has always spoken. We're only now learning how to listen. But what do we listen to when even the sky forgets? Above us, the stars appear eternal, fixed, familiar, ancient watchers pinned in place. They seem to hold the same shapes our ancestors once named: Orion's belt, the Arc of the Big Dipper, the pale river of the Milky Way winding overhead. But they are not fixed, and they are not forever. Even the stars forget. Constellations, those ancient symbols, are only illusions, shapes formed by accident, drawn across impossible distances. We assigned them meaning. We told stories through their patterns. But the stars themselves drift, slowly, across the firmament. This is called proper motion. Each star moves, not enough to notice in a single lifetime, but enough to shift the sky over millennia. The hunter becomes unrecognizable. The scorpion's tail unwinds. The polar star changes hands. The north once pointed to Thuban. One day it will point to Vega. And one day even these names will be forgotten. The sky you see tonight is not the sky seen 10,000 years ago. And it is not the one that will shine over our descendants. The stars we wish upon now may not always be there. Could it be that even memory written in light can fade? Supernovae erupt and disappear. Stars collapse. New ones are born. And all the while, the galaxy spins, dragging the night sky into new configurations. It is celestial amnesia, not cruel, not careless, just a forgetting born from motion. And yet, there is comfort in it. Because if the sky changes, slowly, softly, inevitably, then change is not something to fear. It is cosmic. It is shared. It is written into the pattern of everything. We are not alone in our forgetting. Planets wobble on their axes. Moons drift. Orbits stretch and shrink. Even the sun will one day expand, then dim, then go quiet. The heavens are not still. They just move too slowly for us to notice. Until we do. And when we do, it feels like waking up from a long dream. We realize that the constellations we charted, The myths we hung among the stars were only ours for a moment. The sky has held other stories, and will hold more after ours. And yet, for now we remember. We remember by naming, by mapping, by wondering. Telescopes become our eyes, time-lapsed images our memory. We catch stars in the act of becoming, galaxies in the process of colliding, light that left its source before our species had a name. The sky, in forgetting, teaches us something gentle. That memory does not require permanence. That beauty does not require constancy. That the act of noticing, even once, is enough to turn a moment into meaning. And so we look up, not for answers but for reminders. That we are part of this motion. That we drift too. That our thoughts, our questions, our longing, they are echoes of the stars themselves. Could it be that forgetting is not the opposite of knowing, but part of it? That in letting go of what was, the universe makes space for what could be. And if the sky forgets, slowly, with grace, perhaps we can too. Not to lose, but to open. And now we arrive, back at midnight. Not the first one, not the molten birth or the starlit silence, but the last second of the Earth's imagined day. The end of the cycle, the closing breath. And here we are, standing in it. It is strange to realize how small this moment is, how brief our place has been in the story of this planet. If Earth's entire history were a single day, all of human civilization, every language, every empire, every poem would fit within the final second before midnight. 1 second, that's all. Before that, oceans formed, continents drifted, life emerged, evolved, collapsed, returned. Forests grew without names. Ice swallowed the land and gave it back again. Millions of species lived entire sagas without ever knowing we would arrive. And now we have, in the last flicker, the quiet edge of the clock. And yet, it feels full, feels everything, because we are here to see it, to feel it, to imagine what came before and wonder what comes after. To hold memory and question time and speak softly into the dark. What remains in this final second? Dust certainly. Everything becomes dust eventually, stars, cities, stories. But dust is not absence. It is the most honest form of return. It is matter let loose again to find a new shape, a new use, a new voice. Echoes too. The earth is filled with them. In mountains, in bones, in the rhythms of wind and wave and heartbeat. Even our thoughts echo, one into another, passed across generations, softening or deepening depending on who is listening. Maybe we remain, not as we are now, not forever, but something of us. A footprint, a layer, a buried circuit board, a preserved word, held between two stones, a fossilized nerve of curiosity. Maybe that's enough. Maybe the purpose of the final second isn't to define the whole day, but to feel it, to witness it, to look back, not in regret, but in awe, to realize that being here, even for one breath of geologic time, is astonishing. And maybe what remains most is the beginning, because nothing truly ends. Not cleanly, not completely. The final second leads into something else. Not because we survive it, but because time always loops. Because the dust of one age becomes the foundation of another. Because memory, even in its fading, becomes soil. Could it be that endings are just time folding in on itself? That midnight isn't a finish, but a return? If so, then we are not at the end of the day. We are at the edge of another becoming. And though we do not know what comes next, whether the earth will slumber or burn or bloom again in some distant form, we can still stand here, in this moment, and feel the fullness of everything that has ever happened. It's all here, in the crust, in the core, in the sky's forgotten constellations, in the bones turned to stone, in the ice, the sand, the soil, in us. And that might be the most beautiful part, that in this final second, this fragile, fleeting blink, we are awake. And if this is where the story pauses, then let it pause with wonder. Now we rest. The day is done, but not over. Midnight returns, not as an ending, but as a breath. A soft exhale after a long becoming. The earth turns quietly beneath our feet, the stars shift overhead, and the long rhythms we've traced, from fire to water, from dust to memory, begin to settle. It is not silence exactly. It is presence. A stillness so complete it wraps itself around everything, around the oceans, the roots, the wind-stilled canyons, around us, because we are not outside this story. We are not visitors to Earth's memory. We are part of it, part of the dream the planet has carried since before there were eyes to see, or lungs to breathe, or voices to wonder. We are made of its dust, its water, its heat. And now, at the closing of this imagined day, we are made of its time. Time shaped us, pressed us like stone, unfolded us like ferns. Time whispered through erosion, through glaciers, through fire and soil and sky. Carved our history not in straight lines, but in spirals, in pulses, in moments like this, a return to stillness. And perhaps that is the final lesson, that nothing is truly separate. Not life from land, not memory from matter, not us from the deep breathing of the world. Even now, as you lie in the quiet, wherever you are, however you arrived here, the earth is still turning, still remembering, still dreaming. Fossils rest beneath ancient riverbeds. Roots press gently into stone. Oceans hum their long, patient songs. The cave breathes. The glacier exhales. Stars drift in slow arcs, rewriting the constellations we thought would last forever. And you are here with all of it. Not above, not after, not watching from a distance, but inside it, in this final second, in this final pause, in this long, peaceful breath the earth is taking as another cycle ends. Could it be that rest is not the opposite of life, but part of it? That even the planet must dream, must sleep, must return to quiet before it begins again? And if so, if the earth sleeps now, then we can too. Wrapped in the bones of time, cradled by gravity, held by everything that ever was, and everything still to come. Let your breath slow. Let your thoughts drift like sediment through calm water. There is nothing to chase, nothing to solve. The day has already spoken. Now it's time to sleep. And in that sleep, to remember, you were here. You were part of the planet's memory. And you still are.